Hello and happy Cyberpunk Day 2022. I'm Matthew A. Goodwin, creator and co-founder of Cyberpunk Day, and I'm joined by a man who needs no introduction in the world of cyberpunk, Elias Toufexis, known for his work in video games and TV shows like Star Trek and The Expanse. And of course, he is known to cyberpunk fans for being in two of the biggest cyberpunk franchises of all time, that is namely Deus Ex and most recently now Blade Runner 2. So thanks for joining me, Elias.
Oh, thanks, Matthew. I'm glad to be here. Cyberpunk fan myself.
That I know. I have seen you mention that in previous interviews, so I was really excited to get you on to talk about the genre that we clearly both love. Yeah. I do want to start by talking about Deus Ex. It's still considered one of the best, if not the best, cyberpunk video game franchises of all time. Why do you think that series has lasting success and staying power like it does?
I think because you can explore so much, or rather, you could go into so much detail and depth because it's a massive, all four of them rather, 5, 6 if you include the mobile games. But you can go into such massive detail of what this cyberpunk world is, as opposed to something like a movie or a TV show. TV show, you have a little bit more time, but in a game, you have 70, 100 hours of reading material and character material and the world building and all that. So you can just lose yourself in this cyberpunk world that you kind of want to live in. And I think that's why I go back to it, even if I weren't in the game, even if I hadn't worked on it, I go back to those games just because I like. You really do. They do such a good job of really just immersing you in the world. And you kind of like, I kind of want to live here. I kind of want to go to these cities and do these weird, like pods in China or things like, which they actually have, but things like that. And just, take my hover car to this place and the super fast rail to this place. And yeah, it's I think that's what it is. It's just immersing yourself in these worlds.
And it's a world that's totally realistic. You can really imagine that it's just playing the tape forward just that little bit, which is I think one of the things that makes cyberpunk so particularly cool. I was going to ask this later, but just because we're on the subject, is there any mission for you when you do replay the Deus Ex games that stands out for you as particularly like cool or interesting cyberpunk storytelling?
I like anything with. I mean, I think this is, I'm cursed because I'm in it, that I tend to like the stuff that's character driven. So I like anything with Megan, and I like, what I like, and this is very cyberpunky, is like giant conspiracies that are kind of responsible for every little thing. And I like when Adam discovers, it's not specific, but when Adam discovers anything about Megan and gets more clues about Megan working with Bob Page and all that kind of stuff, and those type of missions that reveal more and more. Like there's one in Mankind Divided where I don't remember the name of the character, but he's guiding you to Janice is guiding you to this place, and then you stumble on these recordings of Megan. I'm not even 100% sure you have to do that in the game, or if it's something that just happens if you make certain choices. But it's this great part where Megan's talking about the discoveries of the genomes and all this kind of stuff, and Adam's listening to it and hearing the stuff about the world, but also personally, this is why I like it, personally, he's feeling all this stuff because Megan's still there. And that's one of my favorite things about the game is I get like my fun cyberpunk world that I like because I'm such a giant like Blade Runner fan, but I get to experience it almost personally because I played this character who has such personal stakes in the world. So I don't have to long-windedly answer your question. I don't have a specific thing that I think, oh, that's so cyberpunk, I love it. I think I'm too attached to it personally.
But I think that is a perfect answer and speaks to the other question I had asked you already too, which is why this game has stayed so successful and people
Sure.
still love it. And it is the character development as well. I mean, a cool cyberpunk world is great and it's a great backdrop, but there are many movies that will prove that without good characters, a cyberpunk backdrop isn't enough. You
Well, I
need good
mean,
characters, you need good storytelling.
I love Blade Runner 2049. Like I think it's a brilliant, almost flawless movie. I think it's better than the original Blade Runner. Uh, Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner will always be my favorite because of the nostalgia of it and how much it meant to me growing up. But I think as a film, I think the new one is actually superior, and it's because of the character growth and
And the
Gosling's
questions
character
being
and the
asked too are so
well,
great
that's
in
a big thing about
2049.
Cyberpunk. That's the best
Yeah,
thing about Cyberpunk, right? It's the questions being asked. It's one of the reasons I'm a big Star Trek fan. When people say, "Do you like Star Trek or Star Wars?" You always have that kind of battle, right? I like
yeah.
both. I really like both. There's parts of Star Wars that that mean so much to me. But the reason I think I tend to lean to Star Trek is that same reason I think that I like Cyberpunk so much is generally it's about asking questions about humanity and the human experience. And that's again why people say to me, why do you promote certain things over other projects? Is I do so much stuff. I do so many things. And I go, well, you'll find the things that I'm promoting are the things that I love as a fan. And like, I love The Expanse for that exact reason. And I promoted a lot. I was only in really like 2 seasons of a massive world, right? But I love it because it talks about the human condition and the human experience. Um, and Deus Ex is another one. Yes, it's a very popular character, and I'm glad and I embrace all that. But the reason I love it is because of that. Is because I get to sit there and go, well, I have to play as an actor every possible choice that a player could make in this world, and every choice is a human choice that I have to justify as an actor, and I love that.
Oh,
The
that's really cool. And that actually leads perfectly into my next question, which was the first in Human Revolution.
Yeah,
The Jensen was a bit more one note, a little bit like Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name. You know, it was
yeah.
very very much like that. And in the second game, I know you took over doing mocap a bit and or entirely. And I wonder if you think that sort of taking that role, both body and spirit, is part of the reason that Jensen has so connected with people.
I hope so. I mean, Jensen connected with people in the first one, but it was almost. I'm not the type of actor that does like caricature. I try to always bring something to it. But in that first game, there are a couple of things. First, it was like my third video game ever when I had done uh, Human Revolution. So I was still learning the ins and outs of acting in a game, which is tricky, trickier than people think, than people imagine. And their model for the audition, and then as we went on, was Clint Eastwood. That was like they said to me, like, do a Clint Eastwood. That's who he is. And then if you notice, I don't know if anybody noticed, but the game is recorded out of sequence, like very much out of sequence. We were doing like the last. I remember we were doing that last thing with the big fight with what's her name in the machine, like the third
Mhm.
day or something like that. Um, but then when we did the DLCs for Human Revolution, you can already see that Adam is more human just in the DLCs to the first game
Mhm.
because at that point I'd been doing it for 4 years and I started being able to bring more of my personality and my what I wanted to do with Adam in those. And then by the time we got to Mankind Divided, when they asked me to do it, it was in a unique position for an actor, which is pretty rare, where I know that they can't do the project without me. So I asked for more money, of course. That was the first thing my agent asked for.
Naturally.
But also I said, well, I'll do it if you let me do all the performance capture. Because in Human Revolution, um, they Adam Jensen, I'm 5'10", 5'11-ish. Adam Jensen is 6'2", 6'3",
Mm.
something like that. So in the first game, I had gone in to do some mocap, and they were like, we wanted like a taller, lankier dude to do it. I was like, okay, I don't love that, but okay. Again, it was like my third game or something like that. So I wasn't in the position to say no. And they did it, and I didn't love the choices that the actor made. Uh, I would have done things differently. So when it came time to do the second one, I said, well, I want to do it. And they brought me in and they did some tests to make sure that they can stretch. It had been, the mocap technology had advanced already enough that I could do it.
Mhm.
And so I appreciated that I could do it. And then you're quite right, in Mankind Divided, because I had that kind of, power is the wrong word, but kind of knowledge of the character, and they, quite frankly, they couldn't do it without me. I was able to go, well, I'm going to do it this way. I'm always going to honor the character, and I'm always going to honor the game, but I'm not going to be this stoic, in my opinion, could be boring guy from the first game. I'm going to bring a lot more to it. And they let me, and any cutscene is motion captured and performance captured. So it's
Mm.
everything at the same time. Motion capture is, very briefly, motion capture is what it is. It's just the body. Performance capture is the body, and they have a little camera and dots on your face. And
Right. Okay.
you're mic'd, so you're capturing everything at the same time. So that was all performance capture, and I love it. I really like my performance in Mankind Divided way more than in Human Revolution because of that. And that also lent itself to the voiceover, because there's still, it was like 2 years of voiceover stuff on there. So I don't know that what you're saying is true, in the sense that I don't know that it resonated more after Mankind Divided, or if it was just the character, because I feel like after Human Revolution the character exploded. So I think it
Mhm.
has less. I think that's proof that it has less to do with my performance and more to do with just the character hit in the zeitgeist in a certain way, which for sure I'm part of it. But it was also the design and the writing, and everything kind of came together. It was very strange, because I've done many games since, and many TV shows and things like that, but nothing really hit like Adam Jensen. And it was very interesting to see him suddenly pop into, like, you'll see pictures of top video game characters, and you'll see, the Halo guy and the Gear of Wars guy, and then Adam Jensen's there. And you're like, what? How did that happen? And again, it's not fully me. It was everything. It was just like everything came together. Then I hope what happened is what you're saying, is by the time people came and played Mankind Divided, they said, well, I really like this character. And I mean, God willing, we'll keep it up. Like, I
Yeah.
would
Here's
love to do
hoping.
another. There's so much more I could do with this guy.
Of course, I'm one of those people with my Adam
Yeah, I
Jensen
got a
love.
few of those.
But I do think that yeah, certainly that character really did blow up, and is still listed in all of those top 10
I know. I
protagonist
don't know
lists.
how that happened.
But I think that part of the reason, I mean, because now it's been what, 8 years since the last since Mankind Divided, and it's really,
Crazy.
people are still playing it. I'm still playing it. Like, I did a third playthrough last winter. um People are still playing with it, and I think that character and your connection to the character, I think it really does shine through, and is part of the reason that it's had the staying power that it has.
I don't get
Because
why it has. Oh, sorry. Finish it. Sorry, Matthew.
I was
Finish
just
what
going to
you're
say,
saying.
because it's easy for a character to blow up and then fizzle, for to come and go just as quickly. But this
Yeah,
character has stayed. I mean, people are still clamoring, as you just alluded to another Deus Ex game, more Adam Jensen. I mean, I'm one of
I
those
know.
people. So
Yeah, me too. I would love. I would love to do it. Like I said, I love the character, and I love the one thing that's really interesting about playing Adam Jensen is that I have my version of the character and you have yours. You know what I mean? And everybody has their own version of the character. But I would love to see that. Probably impossible to find the stats on this, but I would venture to guess that more people play him all the way through as an honorable man. as
I
opposed
certainly
to,
did.
yeah. Like I do this thing, this is just me, but I do this thing where I go, I'm not going to kill innocents or cops or like, even if the cops are after me, I'm going to knock them all out because they don't know
Mhm.
what's going on, that kind of stuff. And I'll never kill an innocent. I'm sure people play it where they just kill everybody. I'm sure that's
Oh,
one of
for
the
sure.
great
But I
things
have
about
the
the game. You can
non-lethal
do it.
achievement too.
Well, there you go. I never could get the non-lethal achievement because I'm not that good at playing video games. But
It's a hard one.
yeah, so I end up killing the bad guys, but I don't kill cops or innocent people. But and I hope I didn't do this in the game, but when I would record it, I would think to myself, or when I would performance capture it, I would think to myself, this is the choice that I think Jensen should make.
Mhm.
And I hope I didn't play, like, even unconsciously, I didn't like put more into that choice than I did into other choices. But there are things that I remember just in the first game where do you remember when he's talking to Megan's mom in the first game, and
Mhm.
and it's just one scene, and you have all these things like, I'm really sorry that this happened because we thought Megan had died. And then there's this one thing where she asks, do you know what happened? And I think there are two or three choices, and most of them are no, I don't know. And then there's this one where you can graphically, vividly describe exactly what happened to Megan. And I remember recording, I still remember, this is like 10, 12 years ago now, and I still remember recording it going, who would choose this? And how am I gonna justify playing this properly? Because I have to justify it as an actor, but it's terrible, terrible thing because he describes it in like detail. But she got her head smashed in, and then or whatever it was. I don't remember. Yeah,
Well, it's
but
funny. I
it was
I
fun.
would always back when I had more time to game. So with like Knights of the Old Republic and the Mass Effect games, I would do 2 playthroughs. I would do just to hear them because it's fun to just see the way you interact with the world when you're a total jerk and when you would play the way I would prefer
Yeah,
to play, which is all Paragon. But now really doing strictly one playthrough of any game, I will always choose the more honorable man version. So I
yeah,
miss little nods like that. I mean, it's funny, as a writer to think about writing all of the nasty version of every single interaction that you have with a character.
yeah, and you have to, right? And then again, as an actor, you have to justify every nasty thing. You have to say, well, okay, why would he be doing it? It's tricky. This is what I meant by it's tricky, especially with Human Revolution. Says the first time I had done anything that massive in terms of just dialogue choices, um, and you have to figure out a way. Okay, I have to justify why this character's saying it, even if you completely disagree with it. To be fair, I play a lot of bad guys on TV, and I always have to justify the terrible stuff they do.
Well, and
Uh,
I guess a lot of the time that's up to the writers too. If they've written a good bad guy, there is hopefully a logical reason for them
Yeah,
doing what they're
very
doing.
often it's not that way, especially with network TV. It's just
For
like
sure.
you're doing a bad guy and he's evil. And you're like, okay, I got to figure out why he's doing this.
Yeah, because I know you were in like a couple of episodes of Supernatural too, and a lot of
Yeah,
times with the bad guys on that show, I didn't make it all the way through the 1100 seasons, but
I know there's a
a
lot.
lot of times it was just as simple as they're evil. You know,
Yeah, to be fair, the supernatural character does have a great. The one I
that's
played
that's awesome.
does have a great background story. Yeah, God, that was so long ago. That was like my third job ever.
Oh man, and people I'm sure still talk to you about it. That show again with
Yeah,
lasting
that
power.
show's
I
really
mean, that
popular.
show
Yeah,
has
yeah,
lasting power.
yeah.
Um, so I was going to talk a little bit more or ask you a little bit more about the world of Deus Ex because you had touched on it. But is there anything specifically about that world that really resonated with you or spoke to you about the world that they created?
Um, more socially than anything. I mean, aside from the love of cyberpunk, and and I love my favorite thing about the game is, especially if you have the time, which we're both parents, we don't have that much time. But when you do have the time, my kids are getting older now, so they kind of entertain themselves. So I'm starting to be like open
I
up a
look
little
forward
bit
to
of
that.
time. Yeah, it's coming. Right? You got like 4 or 5 more years. But I was just playing Mankind Divided last month for a little bit, and I'm like, oh, you know what I'm going to do this time? I'm going to read everything. I'm gonna
Mm,
read all the emails. I'm gonna hack into every computer because it just expands the world so much. And I know all the writers, and one of my best friends is the writer, like he writes most of those emails.
Oh, nice.
Like I'm gonna find all those things like that. That's what I like about playing the game, and I love, we've already discussed it, just the cyberpunk world that I love. But as a, I was gonna say as an actor, but really just as a person, I love, especially in Mankind Divided, the moral dilemma. The I mean, they got a little bit of flack for calling it this, but it's just a word. And the mechanical apartheid that they called it.
Mm-hmm.
And that storyline of it feels so real, because it feels like no matter what, if the world can find a way to separate people, it will. And then the augmented become this second class citizen, these second class citizens. And going through particularly Mankind Divided and just seeing these stories from each character that you can talk to, even the ones that don't have any real impact on the game, just an augmented homeless person, and you can talk to them and they'll say how they got there or something like that. And then you start thinking, what would I do in this situation as somebody who's augmented? But I mean, fans of the game know this. The character of Adam Jensen, he doesn't need this one thing that keeps the body from rejecting the augments, this neuropozyne, and everybody else does. So I love the moral dilemma of being that character and going, I feel for these people that are now second class citizens, and I'm one of them, but I'm kind of not one of them because I don't need the things that they need. So there's this separation, and I loved that. I loved playing that. And that's really why, like, when people say, you really want to do a new game, I go, yeah, I'll do it. I'll do a new game. I'll do a TV show. I don't care. I just want more Adam Jensen because of that social dilemma that lies within him that I loved. And that's my favorite thing about those games is that. And then, the broader social dilemma of like, should you have separated these augmented people after the terrible tragedy that happened? And is it their fault? Could it happen again? Like, that's why all these things, and then dealing with the social significance of that is what I love about those games, I think.
Well, and I mean, you touched on something that game specifically does so well, which is taking, well, if one person who happens to fall into whatever category does something, does that mean everybody else now falls into this category? And
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. It speaks to the human nature of wanting to separate people and finding any excuse to look down on people. And especially what makes it so interesting with augments is that it's something that, theoretically could make you better, more efficient.
Yeah. If you have the drug that they'll give you.
All right, technical difficulty. So if you have a mega corporation that's making augments, of course, they're going to, be inclined to want to make it expensive to continue to use them throughout time. So that also speaks to a real reality of our world. Every aspect of the Deus Ex world, they really nailed how it works in the real world while still making it futuristic and
that a lot of that stems from Mary DeMarle, who wrote the two games. And actually, I've talked about this before, but she wrote the first game essentially, and then when we were going to do the second one, when we started, she was kind of a writing supervisor, but she wasn't. I don't know the actual title she had, but she was not the main writer of the game. Mm-hmm. And I remember 2 months in, we're like, it's not working. It's like the game's not working. The writing isn't working. This is not nearly as good as the first one, and we don't want to have that happen. And so Mary basically dropped everything that she had and joined the team, and we started from scratch. So a lot of this great world building and social issues that we talk about is all because of Mary. She's a great writer.
Oh, that's really interesting. while we're speaking of just sort of cyberpunk writing in general, I guess now it's finally time to ask, what's your history with cyberpunk? What brought you in? Why do you love the genre too?
It's got to be Blade Runner. Like Blade Runner brought me in. I didn't know what it was, and then that led me to Philip K. Dick, and then reading more of his stuff. And also, I know it's not cyberpunk, but again, it's the thing about Star Trek that I love is really what it's about is the human condition. And that's kind of what cyberpunk really is about, is the human condition. And I didn't know this growing up. I watched Blade Runner. I'm like, cool, he's shooting things, and I want to retire replicants too, and like that kind of stuff. But and when I was growing up watching Star Trek, it was the same thing. I was like, cool, Klingons, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
But what started separating those things from me is they're actually talking about this. They're actually talking about what it's like. Then you go back and watch Blade Runner, pick one of the 50 cuts to watch, and you go, okay, what is he trying to say here? And then you're like, what is Philip K. Dick trying to say here? And then you start kind of going into that, and that's the thing that really kind of brought me into it. And then doing Human Revolution, and then going. I also played the original Deus Ex when I was a kid. So I was really into that. I was big into those games in the early 2000s. I was really young, but I remember Wing Commander and Deus Ex and those really, really old PC games. So I just fell into this world, but I think inherently what I love about it is that the same thing I love about Star Trek and The Expanse and any sort of good sci-fi. My favorite sci-fi novel is not really cyberpunk, but it's I Am Legend by Richard Matheson.
Mm-hmm.
I love that novel. And then you read it and you go, okay, this isn't about vampires,
Right,
or zombies or whatever you want to call it. It's about the human condition, and that is the same thing that appeals to me in cyberpunk. It's the human condition. It's dealing with the difference is cyberpunk is futuristic human condition, so it's a lot of dealing with technology and how that impacts humans. And the last thing I am is a Luddite, and it's I'm very much like, ooh, what does this thing do? And I want the newest phones, and I want the newest phones, and I want the newest Macs and the newest computers and all that stuff. And like I'm big into like Apple Watches. Like I want the new one, and it's so big. I'm like, do I really want to get it? Yeah, I really do want to get it. And I think that is part of it for me. It's like I love technology. So again, what the thing about cyberpunk is, it's tech mixing with humanity and how you deal with it. And then as a parent, this is kind of a broad way of speaking about it, but your kid is 5, so you're probably not quite there yet, but my daughter is 12 and she has a cell phone.
mm-hmm.
And you start going like, how much tech do I have to keep from her? Or how much am I allowing her to do? And it's a dance that only our generation has to go through. Like our parents didn't have to deal with us at 5 years old. Tech was TV. That's nothing. That's just like, nope, off or get out of the room. Now it's everywhere.
And the Nokia brick or whatever when we were teenagers didn't do much anyway. You could play that Snake game, but it wasn't sending pictures or any of the terrifying realities.
We're the first generation of parents. Yeah, we're the first generation of parents dealing with this tech and the accessibility of it. The fact that, and the internet, dealing with the internet so that in a weird way, it's very, broad way of saying, but it's the tech dealing with humanity. And that's what cyberpunk is at its core, right?
Well, yeah. And thinking about the last few years also, what a pandemic at that level would have looked like even 30 years ago.
Before the tech,
is vastly different than my 3-year-old son on Zoom with his preschool teacher.
100%.
Grappling with tech and how quickly it's moving forward versus how quickly.
But there's the perfect example. Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. There's a perfect example is you look at it as a dangerous thing. A lot of people inherently look at tech as this is dangerous. like, everything was dangerous when it first came out. Cars were dangerous, windshield wipers were dangerous. And now this is dangerous. But hey, man, if it wasn't for tech, for the advances in technology, when COVID hit, and I'm not the only one, of course, but I would have ended up being homeless. The only reason I was able to pay my bills was because I was able to do a lot of my work over this kind of thing. I'm like, oh, I'm going to do a game or an animated series from this booth that I built in my house, but I needed all this tech to do it. What would have happened if it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago? I would have been screwed.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it actually leads into my favorite question whenever I get to interview sort of cyberpunk luminaries is, cyberpunk often acts as like a cautionary tale about man's relationship with technology.
Yeah.
But do you think that technology is going to be the thing to doom us or the thing that sort of helps to save us from ourselves?
That's a good question. I don't think it's going to doom us. I think that I don't know. This is just my opinion, is that every time somebody says like this is a bad thing for humanity, it ends up not being a bad thing for humanity. Right. You know what I mean? And I think tech only helps. There's dangers inherent in everything. You just gotta be careful. So even though there in our history we've had a civil war, so that was the biggest division. I don't think that the division in this country would be as vast if we didn't have this easy access to misinformation. That's the thing. You have this, there was, before the internet, there was TV, but even the TV didn't have, when we were young kids, didn't have the misinformation that is on the internet now, and so easy to get and believe and spread. Like you said, it's so easy. I get emails from my in-laws that I look at them and I go, this will take me 10 seconds to debunk.
Right.
It'll take me 10 seconds and I'll just look into it and I'll go, yeah, so this is what it actually is. This isn't true. But that email that my mother-in-law has sent has gone through 400 people by the time it gets to me. So if 200 believe it,
well, and there's a certain absence of logic where it doesn't even matter if you could debunk it, because so many people have found their community members who believe the exact same misinformation that they say, well, these 500 other people believe the same thing, so it must be true, and they can just sort of wash away any sort of sense of logic.
Yeah. So that's a long way of answering the question of, is technology bad for us or good for us or going to doom us? If anything dooms us, it's the quick access to misinformation. But then at the same time, like my kids, I realized the other day when they did this, they're like, Dad, how like, what's the biggest, my son, because I was telling you he's big into zoos, right? He's like, what's the biggest zoo in the world? And I was like, look it up. And he takes his phone and he looks it up. And I was just looking at him going, that's incredible when you think about it. It's incredible that you can do that. That's mind-blowing that you can do what you just did, that we didn't have that. Nobody had that before you. Like,
yeah, even in high school, if we had a question, we had to just debate, ask ourselves, make up bullshit answers, just,
go to the library, maybe go to the internet and hope somebody has some information about it.
Right. But now you're absolutely right.
Like, boom.
Right. You never have to ask, what about this? Right? What about that?
Yeah. And that's the other thing that tech, it proves, is that we're at a point in history where any piece of information is literally at our fingertips, but the public is generally stupider than ever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's crazy. That's crazy.
That's like pretty perfectly put. But it was interesting, I asked this same question of Mike Pondsmith last year, who created the world of Cyberpunk 2077. He put Cyberpunk in a big way on the map. His world is so dark, and he also was largely optimistic about about humans' relationship with technology and said, for the most part, it is the thing that helps us the most. It might be the thing that can, save our environment, save humanity. And it was interesting to hear that most people, even though we all sort of traffic in this grim future storytelling, are rather optimistic about how technology can actually interact with our world.
Are you optimistic about it?
I tend to be. My books, while cyberpunk, have also been called sort of solar punk, where there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it takes 7 books to see if there is, but
Of course.
um,
That's
but
that's just smart marketing.
I tend to try to tell a story that ends in a way that can be hopeful for humanity. I mean, even though cyberpunk tends to be pretty dark and not particularly optimistic.
Yeah. Well, that again is one of the best things about at least Human Revolution is you got like was it four different possible outcomes or choices that you can make, and they all affect the world in a different way.
Mhm.
That's actually one of my favorite parts. I remember I was on set shooting something. I think it was in Toronto, and I had to do those 4 long monologues for the end of Human Revolution. And it was like an 8-hour day or something because they're just so long. That wasn't it. Probably wasn't. It's probably like a 4-hour day. But and I remember thinking like these are cool. Like I don't know which one is the right choice, which I guess is the point of the game. You don't know which one is the right choice. And that's again
And a true sign of good storytelling.
Yeah, yeah. When you don't know what's going to happen. But
Yes,
that's the
guess.
big. You know what? There's the big difference between something like Star Trek and Cyberpunk. And I know I keep coming back to it because I love it so much. But Star Trek is inherently optimistic, and it's always like mankind will, no matter what happens, the human condition will persist. And I think Cyberpunk doesn't always go that way.
Yeah, it tends to go pretty hard the other way, more in the
Yeah.
noir direction, more in the bad ending
Yeah.
direction. I also did want to make sure that we touch on, since you also got to be a part of another one of the most famous cyberpunk franchises ever. You got to be in Blade Runner Black Lotus. So what was that experience like?
That was cool. The voice director of that and I are friends, and he just called me. He's like, "You want to play this character?" And I'm like, "What is it, Blade Runner?" I'm like, "Yes, of course, I want to play the character in Blade Runner." Yeah, that was cool. I love that they're expanding this world so much. You heard about the TV show they're doing, right?
Oh yeah, Amazon live action. You need to get on that too.
I do, and I know the producers too.
Do
I gotta
it.
get on that show. Yeah. Yeah, so they're doing that, and I know it wasn't box office wise successful, but 2049 is like a masterpiece for me. I think it's so being part of the world was a no brainer, and yeah, I think Black Lotus is really fun, and it's so cool to just see cyberpunk animation.
I mean, that more than anything, with Edge Runners recently, it
I was
sort
going
of
to say with
showed
Edge
how
Runners
much
now,
people are clamoring for cyberpunk. It's this
well, look,
genre.
hopefully if we don't do the game, hopefully somebody comes to their senses and goes, well, at least let's do an animated series of Deus Ex, or at least let's do.
Oh, that would be.
If these things are
we need extra writers.
Yeah, yeah, man, yeah, it would be amazing, right?
Well, I think we just need. I think Edge Runners really showed how much people still really connect with this genre.
Yeah.
The argument could be made that, well, at least certain episodes of Black Mirror are cyberpunk or asking the same questions. I think that there is a real desire for people to engage with our relationship with technology and the way that it's going and what the near future in our lifetimes might look like.
Yeah.
And hopefully this is just the beginning of a lot more of that.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I mean, as fans of the genre, yeah, I really hope so. I think there's a lot of opportunity, and we'll see what happens. Hopefully, the Blade Runner TV show is a success, and then
that'll really help decide. I mean, if nothing else, 2049 did help pave the way for the new Dune, which I just have to assume you also loved.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Denis Villeneuve, that's how you say his name, by the way. Denis
I would not
Villeneuve.
have tried.
Yeah. We're from the same town.
That's important.
Um, and he's I think maybe my favorite director right now. My favorite working director. So I love Dune. My only issue with Dune was like, oh, it's ending. Like
Mhm.
I gotta wait. Like I knew what was coming, right? Because I know the books. So I'm like, oh, I gotta wait for this part to come. That
Yeah, my
was
wife
my
was
only
pretty
moment.
disappointed when the credits started rolling, and she was like, "Well,
Yeah,
so what?" And I was like, "Well, now you wait 3 years.
yeah,
I could tell you the end of the book." And no, that's okay. I just wish there was more
yeah.
movie right now.
Yeah, but what are you gonna do? And to their credit, they let him do this giant movie, and they're like, if it's a success, we'll let you do the next one. So they didn't do the Lord of the Rings thing where they just made everything, but it's a risk, man. It's hard to film that thing, and he did such a good job.
Oh,
It's a
yeah. I
hard,
mean,
hard novel to
I
adapt.
didn't
Yeah.
know what to expect, but when I heard that he was the person doing it, I felt like, okay, we are probably in good hands.
Yeah.
It's probably
He's so
going to be the
passionate. He's
thing
so smart. Yeah. I would
because
love
I
for Denis
loved the
Villeneuve is
Sci-Fi
like number
Channel
one.
Dune back in the day, but it wasn't particularly good.
No, yeah. Yeah. Or the Lynch one was again much like the first Blade Runner. The Lynch one has a weird kind of nostalgia place in my heart.
I still have the
Uh,
VHS somewhere on the shelf
yeah,
back there.
yeah. But again, much like Blade Runner, he just like Denis Villeneuve took this thing and he just made it better. And yeah, we'll see what happens with the next one. They're filming it now.
So I once made the case on social media that Arkham Knight is actually pretty cyberpunky. It's a
Well, the
rain-soaked
neon,
neon
right? Yeah,
city at night, overrun with low lives, and one single hero covered in tech basically takes down the big bads. So I know you're involved now in Gotham Knights. You want to tell us anything about that?
yeah. It's interesting that it's not part of that franchise. It's its own new game. Everybody, including me, when I saw the initial like release statement, I was like, "Oh, this is another Arkham game," and I love those games. And no, it's not. It's a completely different thing. It's um, yeah, my favorite. I didn't realize that this was a new thing, and it's so cyber. It is cyberpunky because you got Robin and Nightwing, and they're all in neon, like they're in Tron, and
Hmm.
uh, and it's always raining, and yeah, so it does have a very cyberpunk feel. And I get to play the Penguin. They just called me, and they're like, "Do you want to play the Penguin?" Sure. The thing about being an actor, right? You go, "Yep, yep,"
Right.
and then they leave, and you go, "No idea how I'm gonna do this."
Now I have to learn to ride a horse or whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah. That's what happened on The Expanse too. When they said to me, "Do you want to?" I performance captured this like 9 foot tall kind of hybrid monster in season 2 and 3, and they just called me. They're like, "Hey, do you want to do this?" I'm like, absolutely. And then I remember hanging up the phone, going, "I don't know how I'm gonna do this."
Right.
But I'll figure it out. And that was with the Penguin too. They're like, "Do you want to play the Penguin?" Okay. I don't know how I'm gonna
Sweet.
do
Well,
it.
I'm really excited to hear you. So now I just got a few more fun questions just to wind this down. So I'll do my best impression. Take it easy. Nobody's judging you, which is a famous line Jensen now says to Wayne Haas in Human
Yeah.
Revolution, which I'm happy. It seems like that line is still in there. Did they ever ask you to come back and swap that out or anything?
I friggin' volunteered to do it for free and they still didn't let me do it. I remember um actually I don't know. I don't know if I saw that before release or at least like for the director's cut. Like, let me fix it, guys.
Hmm.
That was like day 2 or something. We were recording that Haas thing. Um and man, like I didn't we didn't know who Jensen was. We were fooling around trying to figure it out. And suddenly this is like from New York. From New York in the 50s, apparently. But they never let me fix it. But that's the nature of video games, man. It's like I'm working on one now. Obviously I can't freaking talk about it, but I'm working on one now that I started when I moved to LA in 2017, and it's still not out. I don't know when it's coming out, but I can imagine if I go back to like the first couple of days of working on it, I'm gonna go, can we re-record all this stuff? Like I don't want to. This is not like I'll watch Blood of Zeus, the Netflix show that I'm on, and I'll be like, oh, I wish I had seen this ahead of time because I would have just gone back and fixed that. Like that one line or this one pull on a specific word or whatever. I guess every actor feels that, but with that part of Deus Ex in particular, you're like, this is like a different character. Can we fix this, please? I never got a chance to fix it, unfortunately.
I think it might be true to all artists, really, because I still sometimes, when I have to read samples of my first book, now written
Oh, I'm
several years
sure.
ago, and I'm like, oh no, okay. I wish I could go back but
that is a
it's
bad
worked and
simile.
it's what set the foundation for what I'm writing now. So,
Yeah,
leave it as it is. But
yeah.
there is an instinct. So another thing I wanted to ask was, you've mentioned that you've worked a lot with and are pals with Michael Ironside, who played one of the most
He's my
iconic.
neighbor. He lives just right over there.
Oh, no kidding.
I mean, not close. His neighbor. He's like blocks and blocks, but it's not.
I mean,
too
even
far.
still, that's pretty close. And he played one of the most iconic cyberpunk villains of all time in Richter. Has he ever mentioned anything about Total Recall?
No, I'm such a nerd. The first time I met him, I was auditioning for him. He was directing like a Canadian motorcycle gang thing that never ended up happening. But I met him, and I was a kid, and I was shaking when I was meeting him when I met him. And I remember he put his hand on my shoulder, and he's like, "Why are you shaking?" I was like, I'm like, "You're Richter. You're like, I would never do this now, but at the time, I would be like, you're Richter. You're Starship Troopers. Like, I feel like you're gonna yell at me, and I'm gonna love it." I haven't seen him in years. I talked to him a few months ago, but I haven't seen him in a long time. But yeah, I'm the one who always brought up his movies,
Right.
because I'm such a geek that way. I'd bring up Scanners, and I'd bring up Richter, and it really, really, like, dude, really hard not to say shit like, "See you at the party, Richter." Like, really, you're just like fighting yourself to not say these things. And it's the same thing when I don't know if you know this, but when I was first starting out as an actor, I was living in Vancouver, and they were shooting Chronicles of Riddick when I got there, which is very cyberpunky also. And I'm a giant Keith David fan. I'm a huge fan of Keith David. And, I mean, there's the guy in The Thing and They Live, and like, I'm a huge fan. And he's at the hotel in Vancouver. There's one hotel where all the actors stay when we go shoot there. And so I knew his assistant. So I said, "Hey, just tell him I'm a big fan." And she said, "If you pass by the hotel tonight, he'll come down and have a drink with you." I was like, "Okay." And I did, and he did. And I spent the first hour, because we were there a long time, I spent the first hour just talking about his movies. And he didn't like start the conversation, initiate anything. It was all me. I'd be like, "Okay, so The Thing, when you were you the guy at the end? Were you like Chris Farley?"
Yeah.
And I was, we're like, "Okay, so in They Live, was the fight with Roddy Piper, was that real? And like, how much did you do?" Like, and then by the end, again, same thing. He's just like, he's just a guy's guy, he's like an actor's actor. And we ended up hitting it off because he had just done Othello not on Broadway, but in New York on like in the park. And I had just played Iago in theater school. And so we started doing a scene back and forth in the middle of this restaurant in a hotel in Vancouver. And I'm doing this scene with Keith David from Othello. And I'm like, this is blowing my freaking mind. And that's the thing that has never, and I don't think will ever change with me. I've been doing this professionally without having to do anything else for about 15 years. And I still like being on the set of Star Trek this past all summer. I'm just nerding out every time. Like, oh, like, do you know what that's from? Like, this is from this. That's from this. And when I was working on Blade Runner Black Lotus too, I was like, Ooh, they mentioned him. Oh, I know who that is. I'm never gonna like it's just not gonna go away. I'm always gonna like nerd out at this stuff, no matter how old I get. It's just because I grew up with it. I think
And I
again,
think
it's
that
our generation.
enthusiasm shows that enthusiasm is infectious. I mean, people love to work with people who are excited. We've all had that person who's, either on set or at a job or in any context, who's just dragging themselves to be there, doesn't care, doesn't,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
it's just the worst. But when you're side by side with somebody in whatever it is who's really excited, you
Yeah,
get more excited. You want to be a part of it. Your enthusiasm was why you ended up doing the scene as Iago. Like it's
right. Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
infectious.
Yeah. And yeah, so that kind of stuff. I'm always and actors. I don't really get nervous around actors because I think we're just professionals. But I do, I do still get nervous around sports people when I meet them, like sports heroes that I grew up with. I'm a babbling idiot. But I
Oh,
think
good. That makes
actors. I
me
think
feel
are
better. I
more.
met Joe Montana not that long ago, and I
Yeah,
don't know if I said a single word that made sense.
yeah. I guess he's used to that. For me, it
Oh,
was
I can only imagine. It's his whole life.
yeah. For me, it's a bunch of like I grew up in Montreal, so a lot of Montreal Canadiens greats and Montreal Expos greats
Hmm.
that I would bump into in places and be like, "Oh my god, it's Tim Raines or like Vladimir Guerrero." I'd freak the hell out. Some of them are younger than me, and I'm still like, "Oh, why?"
Right. Well, that's the thing with athletes. They're only going to continue to get younger as we age.
I know that's the worst.
I guess, okay, so one last question, and then I'll let you go. What augment do you want and why?
For me, it's pretty easy. It's the one with when you can release the pheromones and help convince whoever you're trying to convince of something. Uh, that one or the one I think it's I don't remember. But you can release pheromones to help convince them, but also you can hear their what is it like hear their heartbeat or something where you're going to
Mm-hmm.
get the right answer. Whatever it is, it's getting people susceptible to like agreeing with you. It would be so helpful in my career. You want to give me this role because of
He just keeps getting every single role.
yeah, exactly. So that one, and then if you're talking physically, oh man, what would actually work in real life? Probably like the jumping off augment where you land softly. Because I would say like the typhoon,
The
but when am
Icarus
I ever going
landing.
to use it? The Icarus landing. But when am I going to use like a typhoon in real life?
Right.
You know?
And I don't
So
know
I
if you
guess
want robotic hands as just a luxury item. I think the legs though could be kind of fun.
yeah, the legs. Or I mean, he does do so much cool shit with his hand. So I don't.
Yeah, I mean, being able to punch through walls for no other reason than being cool would be fun.
Yeah, but when are you going to use it really?
I
If
mean,
there
yeah,
was a war
literally never.
on, then I'd want a whole bunch of stuff. But
Yeah.
for life, yeah, I just want that pheromone thing.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And I do just want to make sure that I've said, even though I know you can't say anything about it, all of us Adam Jensen fans out there are really hoping for a third, maybe a conclusion to the Adam Jensen arc in a new Deus Ex game sometime in the future.
I honest to God, I haven't heard anything. I wish I did, and I hope we do another one. I hope we do an animated series. I hope they do a TV show. I hope something comes out of it because I don't want to finish with Adam Jensen yet. I'm not done with him.
Well, here's hoping. All right. Thanks so much.
All right, man.